following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio streaming and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, and I barely made it through This Is It's Not Therapy. It's a bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? Enunciate. But I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health, using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. See, I changed up the intro there just to show that I am not a robot. I do it differently every single time. No, I don't. Yes, I do. So I'm avoiding, because we're going to talk about some heavy stuff. Last week we talked about suicide. This week we're going to talk about murder, specifically the whole United Healthcare CEO shooting. I'm not going to focus on the details of that story. Little things here and there when they're relevant, because they're changing, well, hour to hour right now, and I can't keep up with it. Instead, I want to focus on people who are taking to social media to cheer on the guy who planned and committed a premeditated murder of another human being for doing a job in an industry that people don't like. And I'm going to take a different tact on it, right? Because the platitudes of, it's not right to wish anyone dead or be glad someone's dead. Well, that's not really working. People aren't listening. You can't control your knee-jerk feelings to things. It's a weak argument. I prefer to focus on actions, because feelings are always valid. Behaviors sometimes aren't. Top 10 phrase, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. I'm going to offer this argument, okay? Anything you do or say to justify, something for you has to be something you're prepared to let your worst enemy get away with. So if you are not okay with, your worst enemy being glad someone you cared about died, don't be your own worst enemy, right? Are you prepared to get shot because enough people hate you? That's the central question for people who are supporting this shooter. And I'll get into caveats for a bit. Just hear me out for a minute, okay? Delay gratification in your outrage. Are you prepared to be killed as a symbol of things that enough other people can't stand? Because I'm pretty sure I've spent the last few years on this very program advocating that it's unacceptable behavior, for people who believe rightly or wrongly that trans people are grooming children, Jews, Zionists enjoy dead Palestinian kids, or that Muslims are terrorists until proven otherwise. And see, someone somewhere out there only half listened, knee-jerk there, and thought I was saying these were good things merely by mentioning them. No, these are things I'm saying are not okay. Ironic. This is just one of those things about history where you're like, wow. The United Healthcare CEO's murder occurred only 2 days before the anniversary of the killing of 14 women at L'École Polytechnique in Montreal in 1989. And that was a killer that hated feminists the way some people hate healthcare CEOs, right? And you're like, you can't compare the two. That's why I'm focusing on the actions, not the feelings. And as an aside, the media, within hours of getting the suspect's name, right, they seized on his connection to indie video games. Video games don't make you violent. Video games don't make you sexist. We've known this definitively for 10 years and counting now. More like 12 years. All this, from the video games to some of the online discourse, it's all just an exercise in deflection, projection, compassion fatigue, and an online environment that makes very real things not feel real. there's so much in the world that leads us to feel bad that we start feeling strangely good when something really terrible happens to someone we can't stand. I believe the Germans call that Schadenfreude, right? But hear me out. Let me cough, then hear me out. Okay, tickle in my throat. Hear me out. I actually put myself in the place of that healthcare CEO. Not because I think we're the same in that many ways, but because there are people out there who put a lot of time and effort into making me seem evil too. And it's completely legal in this day and age to make someone seem evil. It's considered fair comment if they're in the public eye, right? There's people out there who vehemently hate Taylor Swift. And for God's sakes, hating a pop act for being successful through some problematic songs, that's saying way more about the people who hate than about Taylor Swift. For some, it's embedded in the idea that she's successful and she made a lot of money, and so they're resentful. Instead of going, hey, wow, you know, a woman's that successful. That's great. You don't have to agree with everything she did to go, you know, another crack in that glass ceiling, right? Oh, glass ceiling. Oh boy, feminism. More on that in a bit. Taylor Swift isn't a person to some people. She's a symbol. CEOs of major companies aren't people to some people. They're symbols. I'm not a person to some people. I'm an avatar for their self-loathing. So us symbols were targets for rage, hate, and malice. And all it's doing is allowing some people to avoid taking a good look inward and discovering the real source of their unhappiness. There are tons of things about the system that need improving. I'm a mental health advocate, right? I'm a mental health journalist. I'm a peer counselor, which is something that is still very poorly understood, but very effective when used in conjunction with therapy, right? There are tons of things in the system that need improving. I'm not going to name them all because it'll take the rest of the show. But a guy like a health insurance company CEO, you get rid of one, another just takes his place. And that's cynical, but we'll start there. All right. Similarly, there will be other pop stars after Taylor Swift. You know, Chappell Roan was a big TikTok meme recently, yeah? And if I was gone, another radio host and podcaster would take my place. But would anything really change? Not meaningfully. Okay, things change completely for the family of the person who's dead, but system-wide, nah, not a dent. I find that people don't like to hear that widespread change is slow and hard. But widespread change is slow and hard. And the amount of despair, fear, and anger out right there, the amount of shame, it's leading people into not acting in accordance with their best selves. I want to be clear. Remember I said, hang on. I do understand why some people don't want to help the police in investigations like this. I've had terrible interactions, especially with York Region Police, where they treated me like I'd done something wrong because I was just trying to offer information, right? I get being afraid of dealing with law enforcement or not wanting to deal with law enforcement or even resenting law enforcement because of bad experiences like that. That's different than being glad someone was murdered. And if you're still glad someone was murdered, you know what? On some level, you can't help that. You can't help the way you feel. You can help the story you're telling yourself that leads to that feeling. But if your first reaction to hearing that guy was shot was good, you can't help that immediate reaction, right? Feelings happen faster than thoughts. It's just important to keep in mind that just because something temporarily feels good doesn't mean it's the right or wise choice, right? Those of us who aren't rich tend to resent people who are, and it'll be interesting to see how sentiment towards this suspect changes, now that it's come out in the media that he's come from a wealthy family who made their money in nursing homes. Yeah. A detail like this shouldn't change how we feel about something. And, even the idea of rich is subjective. Some people think I'm rich because I own my own home. And you know what? Compared to other people, that's true. I'm doing better. I still struggle to pay my bills these days, right? But the fact that little details, little emotionally charged details change how we feel about something, that's what trolley problems were supposed to teach us. And everybody's groaning. Yeah, I'm groaning because trolley problems have gone astray, right? A trolley problem is a thought experiment where a trolley or train is going to cause some sort of death. And you have to choose which person or group of people buy it, right? There's no right or wrong answer to a trolley problem. They tend to be very, very frustrating. The entire point is realizing that we tend to make decisions based on incomplete, emotionally driven information, and details that make things more personal for us tend to make us more inclined to sacrifice the out group for the in group, unless you got that one person who's like, no, it would be wrong to be selfish. So, right, it's more about recognizing how your opinion changes than the answer you come up with. But with the trolley problem, and this is where things gone wrong, the participant has to make a choice. And with social media discourse, action is often punished more than inaction, right? Don't buy products from a place that's doing something you don't like. That's considered good, right? Do get involved in something you don't like to try to make it better. That's considered complicit, right? Moral purity is getting in the way of real change. But the fear of ostracism is so strong, especially among younger people, that it's maybe not emotionally rewarding, but emotionally safer. It's the opposite of reward, right? You're being starved for the sense of achievement, but it's just safer to sit on the sidelines and criticize than it is to try to do something good but imperfect. Because for the first time of many in this show, perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. Top 10 phrase, right? And that's all I'm suggesting. Before you criticize, put yourself in the shoes of the person being criticized. Before you condemn someone, put yourself in the shoes of the person being condemned. Because that person is a person. What would you want in that moment? I tend to hear right now, but they're important and I'm not, so I'm punching up. Okay, here's the thing. You know who most people can't stand? Internet trolls. The only person who likes internet trolls are internet trolls. And I know some internet trolls who can't stand other internet trolls because they not like us internet trolls, right? If you're not acting from a place of compassion and you're spitting stuff out online, you are acting like a troll. Do you like trolls? Okay, then don't act like somebody you don't like. But a lot of people don't like themselves, right? It's impossible to truly act with compassion if you have none for yourself. So instead of lecturing people for the rest of the episode, that would suck. I'm going to talk about self-compassion and self-regulation. Take my own advice and do something productive with this. Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Not Therapy Show on socials or the website, nottherapyshow.com. We'll be back with more breaking down self-compassion after the break on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. Still talking about my thoughts on self-regulation and self-compassion, inspired by the discourse surrounding the United Healthcare CEO shooting. Let's start with self-compassion. Self-compassion is about being kind and understanding with ourselves when we make mistakes, instead of being harsh and critical. It's a learned skill, and it's pretty important. Because we all make mistakes. Again, perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. Perfect is the enemy of self-compassion. And next top 10 phrase, self-esteem cannot exist without self-compassion. Now, I'm not saying self-compassion is easy, especially when you're in a highly critical environment. I get criticized a lot. And when it's really savage, especially when it ascribes intents to me that I don't have, I realize that that's got a lot more to do with the person criticizing than it does with me. Because effective criticism isn't savage, it's measured. It may be tough, but it's fair. It's intended to help you improve, not just hurt. But some people have no experience with something that helped you improve instead of just hurt, because people lacking in self-compassion don't know what it's like to be corrected without spiraling into shame and self-brutalization. They can't take correction without panicking, becoming defensive, passive-aggressive, lashing out, or descending into a public display of self-pity. These are signs of a lack of self-compassion. And when we lack self-compassion, the bad feelings associated with mistakes become so painful that a lot of people get overwhelmed and deflect and project them onto other people. And everyone's self-compassion is limited. Learned and limited. Learned and limited. You can't just constantly throw yourself at the blame and shame game and walk away unscathed because you have perfect self-compassion. Perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect, right? Let's look at a well-known example of another group of people that most people are like, oh, cut it out, right? The activist movement. A lot of people in activist movements lack self-compassion. And I'm saying this because I have talked to the hardcores, and it's obvious, right? They're using activism as a tactic to avoid really looking at the sources of their inner pain because they are filled with self-blame that they're running from. Now, to be clear, getting involved in local causes is good. We need people getting involved in local causes, right? But there are local causes that don't involve just, attacking people on the internet. Causes that encourage lashing out, destruction of property, demonizing entire groups of people, like, say, police or transgender teachers. These activist groups are probably not good for your mental health. I'm not saying that some don't mean well. Some don't mean well, but I'm not going to paint everyone with the same brush. That's exactly what I'm telling people not to do, right? Some of these groups really do mean well. I've talked to them. But meaning well doesn't mean these groups are going to help you be well. Activism isn't therapy. People in common cause are not your friends. Friends can disagree, sometimes quite strongly, and still be friends. Some people have said that activism is the new way young people piss off their parents, and there seems to be some truth in that. But again, that's too much of a generalization for me to be comfortable with. Activism, like I said, is good, as long as it's engaged with from a centered, emotionally regulated place. I know a lot of people don't. And ideally, activism is practiced with compassion, which means developing self-compassion, not using activism to run from the parts of yourself that you hate, okay? When I talk to people about why they hate an entire group of people, yes, I do talk to bigots for research purposes, right? The popular ones for people to hate are Zionists, feminists, Muslims, conservatives, pick your group. I think that's part of the reason that the whole Gaza thing is so charged, is because there's people that just want to hate both sides of that conflict, right? Like, just take your pick. People who hate an entire group of people tend to zero in on a bad experience or a series of bad experiences they had with an individual or a small group of people, and they just extrapolate to that entire group, even though the numbers don't actually work. Or some people have never had a personal bad experience. They're responding to some vicarious trauma they watched play out online to someone like them that they identified with. Reducing people to groups like this, these flattened groups, makes it easier to hate them. When I engage with people who start the conversation lashing out at an entire group of people, I tend to find that their knowledge of the facts of a given topic are not terribly robust. Knowledge is not terribly robust. But their emotional connection to attacking some other is very strong. It doesn't tend to be a discussion based on the facts. It's a permission structure to feel things that, where they come from, society rarely makes real space for. Things like rage, fear, hatred, despair, shame. But these people will rarely admit to actually experiencing these feelings, even after they've called me a baby killer or a groomer. Without evidence, right? It's not a literal baby killer or groomer. It's just the ideology of baby killers or groomers, right? Guilty mind, not innocent until proven guilty. All the fundamentals of a free and just society just go out the window. Why? These people lack self-compassion, right? They need to project all their bad feelings at an external target because they can't process them. Often when I ask them, how would you feel if you were called a groomer? You know what they say? Well, I would listen to the reason the person feels that way. Which just isn't true. How do I know it's not true? Because they're opposing an entire group of people because a relative handful of people they see as same called them some mean names. When you're not in touch with your feelings, you're going to say and do ridiculous stuff like that makes no sense on its face. And then you won't be able to look at it and admit that, yeah, what I just said doesn't make any sense and isn't backed up by my behavior because you're too ashamed to look at it. Those feelings that you're not looking at are controlling you precisely because you're trying to suppress them. When you're sitting on a lifetime of bottled up rage, fear, and sadness that you've never let yourself feel because feeling them is weakness, the slightest thing that reminds you of this weakness is going to set you off and turn you into a person that you don't recognize or like. Seeing your feelings as weakness is a sign of a lack of self-compassion. As opposed to, calling someone a baby killer because they disagree with you politically, which actually is demonstrative weak self-control, right? Socially, we've completely inverted actual strength and weakness because it takes strength to hold back from lashing out. It takes strength to be able to admit to yourself that you're scared or that you've made a mistake. But we call this restraint dishonest or lacking authenticity instead of what it actually is. Recognizing, I wouldn't like to be called that and I wouldn't like the person who called me that, so I'm not going to do it. Lashing out at people, calling them names, that's what bullies do. And bullies are not authentic people. Bullies are the most internally weak people out there. So how do you build strength? Well, how you build self-compassion. Strength comes from self-esteem. Self-esteem comes from self-compassion. It's about changing the way you talk to yourself. For instance, when I don't know something, I tell myself I'm learning instead of I'm so stupid, right? I may sometimes say, I'm so stupid out loud, right? But inside, if I really start to feel stupid, which does happen sometimes, I go, no, I'm learning, right? Because there's so much to learn. There's so much to keep up with. My God, I feel constantly behind. when you're feeling stung, right? When someone has hurt you, don't say, don't let them get to you. Suck it up, right? Say, this hurts. And I'm allowed to feel hurt because the hurt won't last forever. Assure yourself that it's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from them, even when that learning is painful. Assure yourself that what you do and say to people isn't about what they've done to you. It's about how you want to present yourself to people that may not know you. You can stand up for yourself without trying to knock somebody else down. This is really hard to do when you're surrounded by people who tend to lash out and or repress their feelings. There are a lot of teens and young adults out there right now, for instance, who are sitting on a lifetime of bottled up feelings because academic achievement was the only thing they were taught mattered. So they haven't developed social or emotional skills, and they are having trouble finding a job or just navigating the world, what we call adulting, right? And it's not their fault. The best thing a parent can do to teach self-compassion to their kids is to admit when they themselves are wrong and apologize, but don't make too big a deal out of it, right? Is it the worst thing in the world? Probably not. The good thing about apologizing when, immediately is it stays small, right? Instead of telling people how you expect them to behave, model that behavior. Or do both, but you got to be consistent. And this isn't true of just parents and kids. This is true of bosses and employees, coordinators and volunteers, anywhere where there is a power imbalance. And for God's sakes, can we stop the grievance politics? No, that's not stopping anytime soon. I know it's not stopping anytime soon because it works, right? People are beaten down. They feel shame because money isn't going as far. So the best way to make them vote against their own self-interests is to give them a target to deflect and project that shame onto. I had to buy new glasses last week, and they were $865 that I don't really have right now. And did I feel small? Sure. Did I feel even smaller that they got the order wrong? And so I had to send them back. And so I've been like a week and counting. It's going to be at least 2 weeks with no real glasses that I can drive with legally. Do I feel small? Do I feel powerless? Sure. But I'm not going to deflect and project that shame onto some external target. That just continues the cycle of grievance and things get worse. And making things better, owning your mistakes, and practicing self-compassion takes emotional regulation, not just reacting to every spike in feeling that you feel. I'll get into what that is, how to know if you have it, and how to start developing it after the break. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Join the mailing list while you're there, please, at Not Therapy Show on socials. We'll be back soon talking self-compassion and self-regulation on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's the Therapy. I'm still Liana Kirstner. I'm still not a therapist, and I'm still talking about self-compassion and emotional regulation in a world where a lack of both is trendy and cool, right? Before the break, this last break, I promised I'd talk about emotional regulation. What it is, how to know if you have it, how to start developing it, and how it ties into self-compassion. Emotional regulation is managing your emotions in a way where you don't try to control them to the point that they control you. That is not a definition you will find online. That was my own personal journey to figure out what the heck this thing is because the platitudes just weren't working for me. Emotional regulation is being able to stay in control of your actions and reactions even when you're feeling strong feelings. It's a limited resource for everyone, just like self-compassion, right? And just like self-compassion, it's a learned skill. So again, learned and limited. We're raised in this weird social paradox where adults often expect children to have too much emotional regulation too soon. And by that, I mean developmentally, it cannot be physiologically expected of people. Until you're somewhere between 25 to 28 years old, we need to give people a little bit of space and understanding, or a lot, about the lack of physiological capacity for real emotional regulation, right? And so because kids have the hammer brought down on them too early, they learn to suppress their emotions instead of feeling them, and that be bad, right? People raised in these environments may tell themselves things like, every time I say how I'm feeling, it just makes things worse, or nobody cares about how I'm feeling. They may chronically intellectualize things. So they focus on problems and what was said and go over it in their head over and over and over again. So they're thinking instead of feeling. And the issue with that is you think it so much that you actually start rewriting what happened. It's a really tough spiral to get out of. And, it's because when you're not allowed to feel your feelings, you end up just going in a thought spiral, right? Emotionally regulated people don't do that, okay? They can live in reality. They can face adversity, feel a full range of feelings, not overthink things, even if they think about things deeply. I'm a deep thinker, but I had to stop being a chronic overthinker, and not resort to exploding, lashing out, or blaming. Exploding, lashing out, or blaming is not a sign of emotional regulation, okay? If you frequently feel anxious or overwhelmed, that's a sign you're not emotionally regulated. It could be better. If you live in a cycle of blowing up and having to clean up the mess or run away from messes, you're not emotionally regulated. If you live in constant conflict and you don't feel right if you're not fighting with somebody, even though you claim you don't like fighting with somebody, if you're not fighting with someone, it just feels weird and you start looking for the next fight, that's not emotionally regulated, okay? Proper sleep, diet, and exercise all help with emotional regulation. So those are great places to start improvements. I'm going to share with you some more subtle tells I noticed from people who lack self-compassion and therefore aren't great at emotional regulation. And this is, again, not something that you'll find elsewhere online, probably not. This is something I've noticed in my own client work, right? People who lack self-compassion and therefore aren't great at emotional regulation tend to assume I'm going to harshly punish them for mistakes or be mad at them for a mistake or even a disagreement. Their language is focused on faults, mistakes, criticism, and flaws instead of ways the situation could improve or positives they see in a situation or a person. They assume compliments are fake and people who give them are trying to use them. They can't tell the difference between feeling a strong feeling and acting based on negative assumptions. And when they finally admit they messed up after a lengthy argument, their proposed solution is, I just have to do better. I just have to do better. To quote Assassin's Creed 3, Connor from Assassin's Creed 3, that's a video game for people who don't know. It is a good plan. I just have to do better. But it lacks detail, right? If these things describe you, don't worry. There's hope. First, take a break from the news. Modern news is written to appeal to the part of your brain that detects threats. Until you learn techniques to calm that down, being informed is not as important as staying regulated. Second, practice a more measured form of self-talk in calm moments. And this is something that there's a lot of client work, and you're not going to convince yourself that you're absolutely great overnight. And some things you're never going to feel super confident in. Let me give you an example of how this works with one thing. This isn't a terrible thing in my life. It's something I'm comfortable talking about in public, okay? So, real example. I've been the ugly sister my entire life in my family, right? I'm the awkward, ugly, overweight, less charming sister. Because of that, because that's how I was defined really young in life, I'm never going to be confident in the way I look or my charm. You know, it's not going to work if I try to convince myself that I'm some great beauty. I can't even afford to be what passes for beautiful these days in an age where beautiful involves a ton of surgery and fillers that just completely freak me out. But, what's the value assessment here? Would some people treat me better if I was more, conventionally attractive? Maybe in the short term, more doors would probably open to me, but are they trap doors or doors to somewhere good, right? Do I want to be around people who, selfishly just want to be around, acceptably beautiful people? No, I prefer the misfits of the world. They're way more interesting. I tried to be around the beautiful people. It wasn't my place, right? I was taught growing up that you have to be thin and pretty for anyone to really want you. And then I was given the impression that I wasn't thin enough or pretty enough, and that's why people treated me badly. It was just, disgust, like, oh, her. But then I met a lot of people. Remember I said I tried hanging around beautiful people? So people much prettier than me who were treated just as badly, if not worse. I wasted a lot of time starving and stressing myself when the problem wasn't how I looked, it was my lack of boundaries. And yeah, I'm extremely aware that looks are currency. In media, in business, even in things like law. I'm always going to lose out to people who have the look, which I will never have because I'm a ginger. And is that fair? No. So to some extent, I just choose to opt out of an unfair system and focus on places I can actually thrive. I may have a face and body made for radio, but I'm on the radio. It's perfect. See? That's how more measured self-talk works. It's not trying to convince yourself of something that you will never believe because you're never going to believe it. And so you're just going to drive that knife deeper, right? Yeah, I know my self-esteem sucks when it comes to my appearance. And I'm working on that constantly. But it's like Sisyphus and the rock. I'll start pushing that rock up that hill. I'll start feeling better about myself. And then someone will savagely attack or dismiss my appearance. And that rock will roll right back down to the bottom of that hill. We all have something like that about ourselves. And I used to resent beautiful people. I used to lash out at them. But then I realized those people I think are beautiful, they probably don't feel beautiful. Because the world goes after the very thing, often that's your biggest strength. And even when people recognize they make money off their looks, they feel commodified. Because feeling heard and appreciated and respected and cared about, this is a more beautiful feeling than being commodified based on a bee-stung lips that probably came via a needle full of plumpers. Pull from Wicked. I'm not that girl. There were times in my career I fake being that girl, but I'm not that girl. It feels unnatural to me. There's people who are way better at that stuff and want to do that stuff. I don't, See, I'm not ignoring things here, nor am I divorced from reality, even though people get very uncomfortable when I go, look, I'm not beautiful. Because they don't ask me what the definition of beauty is, right? They're like, oh no, you look good. I actually think you look good. It's not the point, right? The point is it's never going to be enough for those people. I'm not ignoring the fact that parts of the world, Instagram, will judge me negatively for not being on the artificial beauty train. There's pockets of TikTok, same thing. I find the truth. And I find the truth that's most motivating for me. And I follow that. And for me, the most motivating truth is you are not that girl. You don't have to be. And that's why that's my favorite song in Wicked. Yes, I've seen the Wicked movie twice. Don't at me. Okay, at me. Let's continue this after the break, right? Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Not Therapy Show is the website. Fill out the contact form there to get in touch with me, or at Not Therapy Show on socials. Doing better at the threads. People don't like threads. Still not feeling blue sky. Anyway. Self-esteem and self-compassion when we come back, right? On It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kirsten. I'm still not a therapist. And we're still talking self-esteem and self-compassion in a really mean world. And yeah, the world overall, like the mass communicated world, is really mean right now. We cannot hold ourselves to those standards. It's cruel and it's never going to be fair. And there's always going to be a critical mass of people who delight in tearing you down to avoid their own lack of self-compassion and internalized misery, right? And I want to spend the remainder of the show talking about not being that person. Like I said off the top, don't be a troll. Nobody likes trolls, not even other trolls, right? Because trolls don't like anybody, right? The next time you feel the need to lash out at someone on social media, ask yourself why. What is flinging negativity at this person really gonna do? It's gonna temporarily maybe make you feel more powerful, but in the long run, all it's gonna do is make you afraid of people just like you online. Self-awareness is really important here. People go out of their way to disconnect from cruelty. We misunderstand cruelty. We see cruelty as some premeditated thing instead of a reaction that tends to always have a reason, but doesn't make it right. You know, when you're speaking to someone out of bitterness and spite, you are probably being cruel. And the only way to prevent that is to recognize when you're feeling those negative feelings, that bitterness, that spite, that self-loathing. And when you feel that, stop. Get away from the keyboard. Put down the phone. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And again, this is a problem with teenagers and social media and it, you know, affecting their college admissions and all that stuff. Teenagers do not have the impulse control to do this effectively. This is something for adults, and this is something that we cannot expect teenagers to learn when we're not modeling a self-control model driven by self-compassion, right? Caring about yourself enough to not take that swipe, right? Or else you end up like Drake, who are suing people because they can't, you know, he can't accept that Kendrick Lamar bodied him with Not Like Us. Like the fact that that is still going on, that is an example. Drake has so much money and so much influence. He could do so much good. And he's still hung up on a rap battle. Like, he's ruining the purpose of a rap battle, right? A rap battle is you get it all out, you do it non-violently, it's over. You don't start suing each other for lyrics in a rap battle. Aubrey, Shanda, come on, if you don't know what that means, never mind. Before you take steps like that, And it's very hard to stop yourself from acting in anger or shame or rage or fear if you're not feeling anger, shame, rage, or fear. And I'll give you an example of something recently. The whole I didn't mean to thing. I didn't mean to is a very, very easy thing to say. It is a very surface thing. The best way to show that if you hurt someone and didn't mean to is to understand why what you did was hurtful so you don't do it again. I didn't mean to comes across as hollow. It can come across as hollow at any point, but if you use it too often, what it actually means is you don't care enough or you're running too fast from yourself to pay attention. And people who are self-aware, people who are accountable, are just not going to accept that, and they don't have to, right? When I had somebody spend 45 minutes on I didn't mean to, and then I asked, well, what were you feeling in that moment? Well, I was feeling bitterness. Well, yeah, that totally came across in your communications. So, I said on some level, you meant to communicate bitterness at me, right? That, yes, you accurately communicated your meaning. You see the twist there? You may not feel important enough to be able to hurt someone, but you did mean to communicate those negative feelings inside you. Unless you didn't because you're not feeling those negative feelings inside you. But again, back to recognizing your feelings. And you can't recognize your feelings if you're going to judge every feeling you have. Having a negative feeling, even something like jealousy, spite, rage, bitterness, those are okay. It's okay to feel those things. Acting on them is where you can go wrong. And if you can name, I am feeling jealous or bitter, or I am feeling hatred, and I need to not act on that in a way that's going to make me a bitter, jealous hater, right? That's how you end up like Kendrick instead of Drake. And I'll leave that there. Liana at nottherapyshow.com is my email. Nottherapyshow.com is my website. At nottherapyshow on social medias. Thanks for taking this journey with me and trying to make something productive out of a really, really horrible thing. You're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you.